Hello and welcome to It's About Youth. I'm Fanashe and this is the show that talks about issues that matter to youth. Now, in 2023, Kuala Lumpur is listed among the 10 cities that recorded the highest jump in the livability index. According to a study conducted by Economics Intelligence Unit, Kuala Lumpur recorded a jump of 19 steps from the previous livability ranking at 94th place out of 173 cities. Now, that shows a lot of improvement, but we want to know the real deal. We have with us today Koh Cha-ly from Urbanmetry as well as Afaf Ismail from Think City to basically decode this ranking and also talked about KL being a livable city. Right, thank you so much for joining us. We'll start with you, Cha-ly. Now, do you think KL is a livable city, especially for youth?
So, just to give some context, right? So, the youth generally have very limited vehicles to interact with the city. So why do I say that? So the city is actually our first social platform. So you think about Facebook, I mean kids on TikTok, on Snapchat, right? So they socialize there. But before the invention of social media, the city is where
people go
out. They go out and
then
they hang out with their friends in school, etc., right? So the city is actually our very first social interaction point for youth. Previously, when the city was safe or safer, parents will allow their kids to go out. They go to school, they walk to school, there's a lot of interaction, and then they socialize to people in their neighborhood, etc., right? Today, unfortunately, over the last 20 years, it has become very difficult for parents to allow their kids to interact with the city over time. So while our livability index or comfort level has gone up, this idea of safety for youth in the city, for them to roam around and interact, unfortunately is still quite poor. And I think we do need to do some really serious work around making our cities safe for the youth.
Right, okay, so that's one aspect, safety. What about you, Afaf? Do you think KL is a livable city?
Well, from our experience from Think City, thank you for having us here. So we work closely with making cities livable, but one of our focus groups would be communities in public housing in Malaysia, so Perumahan Awam as well as PPRs. So we also have a focus group on youth, and then when we look at livability, we start asking questions, what do we define as livability? And access, safety, and cleanliness is usually the top 3 issues. But what's interesting is that for the kids, their definition for livability is very simple. How do they live day to day? Which means, do they go to school? How do they get to school? So it's a matter of access, which relates very closely with safety as well. So the city almost, I wouldn't say it's not livable. It's definitely improved, as with the index as well. But there's definitely areas that we can improve on, especially of how we look at kids and they interact with the city as a whole.
Right, okay. So I guess that goes to my next question, which, you already sort of lay out the foundation there. So what makes a city livable? Based on the index that, I mentioned just now, it was stability, health system, culture, environment, education, as well as infrastructure. Are these the only ones, or are there any other factors that we need to consider that we might have missed? Cha-ly?
So I think the factors that is listed is a very hard kind of factor, right? So health, infrastructure, these are the things that a lot of people sort of are able to measure. Things like how safe do you feel in the city is harder to measure, but really those things that you mentioned is to lead up to that, to the fact that it is healthy, it is pleasant, it is safe. So a lot of times, because it is so hard to measure, a sense of do you feel safe to walk out at night, for example, is a kind of a very subjective form of ranking. So people, fall back to infrastructure and things like that. But when you have that sort of miscommunication on what is really the goal, our win as a city is to feel safe. But to do that, we build infrastructure, or we measure infrastructure. Sometimes authorities or the people with power will misinterpret that as let's just build more infrastructure, right? Because that might or might not lead to the sense of safety. So I think sometimes it is good to measure, but even if you cannot measure, you do really need to know the real objective of what you're doing, right?
Right. I mean, Afaf, I'm pretty sure you've been on the ground as well, you know, in PPR communities, you know, urban communities. How do they see, you know, livability other than the index that we've given?
The most important thing that we found, especially with the youth, is a sense of community, whether they're part of the community or whether they're I would say, a result of the community. So like whether you are empowered to make decisions because you are part of the community, or you're just the answer to whatever decisions were made without you. So I can see that sense within, just to give context, we work with 10 PPRs across Klang Valley, 8 in Kuala Lumpur and 2 in Selangor. And then the difference here is how, whether they have a clique or basically a community that they can go to for their problems. So for community and for kids, for them, their closest people are their neighbors, their friends, or even their teachers, their futsal coaches. So we can ask simple questions like, how many name friends do you have? And I'll get to that on the third part. But I think that's an important thing. But like Charlie said, it's a really difficult thing to measure, because how do you measure a sense of community? But you can feel it. When you go into a site, you can really feel like if they know each other, and if they feel included in the decision making as well.
Is it sort of like a sense of belonging in a like, if I see, like, I don't live in KL, but whenever I go to KL, I see KL as, you know, this huge sort of metropolitan city. So is it like for people there, they need to be in some sort of, like you said, like a community, like a sense of belonging, knowing who they are with, knowing their own people? Is it like that?
They want to feel welcome. So, for example, we have a few friends, I can't say their name, but let's just give a Sarah and Maria, for example. And they're like 14-year-olds. So when they walk to school every day, they know who's the uncle selling the titambi, who's the auntie selling the vegetables at the side of the road. And that's the community that we're trying to foster. But the thing is, these communities need activities, and the activities need infrastructure. But then for the programs to happen, you need stability and you need environment.
Yeah,
Everything's very interlinked.
everything is pretty much correlated, right? Right, okay. So we want to talk about solutions, obviously, after this. But let's talk about challenges first, so we can deal with the solutions later. So what sort of immediate, I would say, problems, barriers, challenges, you know, somewhere along those lines that you think KL faces in making it a livable city? Afaf, we can start with you.
Okay. I think because of our time with the community, so we have a program called Kita Untuk Kita, where we work directly with communities across the 10 PPRs, and we have something like a mapping program with the kids. Let me tell a story of one kid that did the mapping exercise with us. So we did a cognitive mapping where we tried to map the cities in their lived experiences, something of like Image of the City by Kevin Lynch, right? But to the local context. And Sarah, she's a 7-year-old girl, and we asked her to map your home and the peripheral environment around it. So she started with a house, your typical house, right? Just imagine in your mind. And then you have a hall, the community hall. Down there you have a playground, a futsal court. To the right you have a market, and to the left you have a surau. So she started drawing roads, and then her going there. And then we asked her the important question: which one do you like to go? Which one do you feel safe? If you like it, you mark it with a black star. If you dislike it, with a red star. Something along those lines. And we found out that infrastructure that's denoted for community space or community engagement, like the community hall, the futsal court, or even like our pasar should be safe, right? Because there's a lot of people. She denoted it as unsafe. But the surau, she denoted it as safe. So you can see a photo of her. She would draw a stick with a scarf on, a triangle. And it's really adorable. But that's how she relates to the city. That's the mental mapping that we received. And then we started asking questions. She said, well, my parents will only let me go to the surau or to the mosque nearby because that's where the girls are. If the futsal court is where the boys will be. If the pasar, I'm not sure who's there. So then you start asking questions about what kind of activities do you do there? And like, oh, we just talk at the surau. So there's this information that the activities or the places they visit is limited to what kind of programs they do, whether it's targeted for them and whether their parents feel it's safe. Right. But you might not, doesn't play into effect maybe 10 years later when they're 17. So we did the study all the way to teens. Their social capital. Boys had 4 times the number of friends than girls.
Right.
So social capital is this thing of social interaction between people, and that could give social dividends like linking or networking. And when girls have only a quarter of what the boys have with the same environment, then you start asking questions about how can infrastructure within the city be more inclusive of all sectors of the community.
Cha-ly, since infrastructure is mentioned here, I want to touch on what do you make of infrastructure in KL to sort of deal with safety issues, community issues, accessibility issues, and also probably I think one thing that is quite at the head of a lot of youth are they're anxious about like climate change and all that as well. Are these all being factored in when it comes to infrastructure in KL?
So I wanted to talk about negative infrastructure. So Think City just talked about the positive infrastructure, then let's talk about the negative infrastructure. So her story was very touching because it touches 2 very, very important things. One is the lack of trust. So as a kid or a youth, they defer the judgment of something is trustworthy or community is trustworthy or not to their parents, right? So parents say, my parents will allow me to go to Surau, it doesn't allow me to go to the pasar, right? So that in itself, really, yes, you can improve the infrastructure, etc., but it is a trust issue. So the parents don't trust whatever community is there because of the connotation, or they have no idea who is there. So there's an unknown factor. So why is there an unknown factor? The unknown factor comes from quite a lot of small decisions that we have made that has eroded trust that we can opportunity build between 2 people. So let me elaborate on that. We have given up so much space to the highway, okay? And that is a negative infrastructure primarily because you take a person, you wrap him in a bubble, which is your car, then you transport him across the highway to the destination, and the whole time, the opportunity to build trust among your community is gone. If a kid walks from his house to school, he will see other kids, they interact, or they say hi to the other mother if they're walking together, or somebody's brother. You have all this interaction along the way. All that has been lost. And we gave that away because we need the highway, right? So if you compound it even more across communities, there are communities that take the bus, communities that don't take the bus. That is the only time really in your busy day that you look at the other guy and go like, I see this guy every day, he goes to work every day. There's a sense of sort of trust, and that entirely gets eroded. So as we build infrastructure, we do have to think about what are we eroding? What kind of other infrastructure that you can use to build community has been lost. Every time we give up another lane for the car, all that community that can be built via the bus or via the pedestrian walk is gone, right? And we don't sort of think about the cost-benefit analysis of the trust erosion there.
Right. It definitely became an afterthought for a lot of people that, this thing actually matter. Right. We want to talk more about this, but after this break. Hello and welcome back to It's About Youth. I'm Fanashe, and today I'm joined by Cha-ly from Urbanmetry as well as Afaf Ismail from Think City, where we are talking about, is KL a livable city? Now, the first half just now we talked about challenges, issues, barriers that hinders KL from being a livable city. Now we want to talk more about solution. But before we dive into that, I want to ask Afaf here, who has been on the ground looking at, PPR communities and all that, especially for youth. Do you think people, a lot of people actually migrate from, rural areas, Kelantan, Terengganu, whatever, to come to KL to make a living. And there are also people there already in KL who are trying to make ends meet. So do you think, the people of KL face affordability issues when living in KL?
Well, thank you for the question. In Think City, our program Kita Untuk Kita, endorsed by the Malaysian government, we also have a part where we want to understand the qualitative and the quantitative aspect. So we have a household survey where we ask those questions. How do we measure affordability? So we ask in a way of like, do you have problems buying food to the point where somebody is hungry? Do you have problems paying rent on time? So we found out through that household survey that at least 1 in 5 cannot afford food, to the point where somebody will get hungry. And that's one point, but then the outcome of that is that child stunting. So if a child cannot have proper nutrition, then they will have stunting issues later in their teenage years. And then we have studies in UNICEF that shows that stunting kids in PPRs are at higher risk due to not just nutrition, but the environment as well. And that goes back into affordability, right? We can ask one question, can you afford food? But the outcome is much more bigger than that. I think the biggest privilege of money is that you don't have to think about money. So for a teenager, imagine you're 17. If you don't have to think about money, your options are much more infinite. But if you're a 17-year-old and you have four younger siblings, then your option is just one. You need more money. So then that limits your world immediately, and you have to think about money, and it almost consumes the youth. And it's something that we see often. They don't think about 10 years' time, 20 years' time, because they don't have the privilege to. And affordability, that's one thing that we struggle with, even with our project. How do you balance this quantitative issue? It's just 1 in 5, but then the qualitative outcome is so much bigger. And that's what we're trying to change or improve on, giving more options to the youth, because sometimes, I wouldn't say jaded, but 17 years with limited options. Once you leave, there's only, you start doing gig work or customer service or F&B, which are livable and great jobs. But what if one kid wanted to be something else, but they never had the chance?
Yeah. So I think it's more to do with, I feel that a lot of this youth from, you know, out of KL comes to KL with high hopes of making it big, and wanting a stable job, a more high earning job, but only to become, you know, in for lack of better words, a bit jaded by the hopes of making it in KL when it comes to housing, you know, making ends meet, food and all that. And I think the government is trying to address that with part and parcel of it with housing as well, when it comes to the KL Structure Plan 2040, right? So on that, and as well as other measures, how do you see efforts in ensuring livability in KL, Cha-ly?
The KL 2040 local plan just came out last week. Very interesting document, very long document. We're hoping to build an AI just so that you can help people to summarize it and make sure that you can ask it questions, right? And not flip through 1,000 pages. Yeah. So hopefully my engineers who is listening to this, make sure that you work harder. That's one. And the second one is that just to point one thing out that we noticed is that there's going to be a lot of redevelopment. So there's going to be a lot of redevelopment. The city has been, 60, 70 years on. And for 2040, there's a lot of aspirations to undo a lot of the limitations planned from the 1950s and 1960s, right? So all that is great, but there is still a very strong focus around the structure and the infrastructure. And I urge folks to think about the city less so of an asset and more so of a platform, right, for people to start interacting with it. So if you look at the plan, a lot of it is about encouraging. It's almost, I don't know what's happened to us, but we're not making strong enough a stand on certain livability aspirations. So when I say make strong enough a plan, it means that a lot of times we want to encourage, for example, the use of public transport, the use of micro-mobility, So then we give budget to build more. But we don't put in the stick on the behavior that we don't want people to do. For example, we don't raise car park prices. We don't raise toll prices. We don't, so the policy is now sort of like in a two dimensions. There's two dimensions
so it's very like, use more public transport, here have more public transport. Is it like that?
You know, use more, here's more public transport, but I'm not going to do anything about the car parks that's going to grow as well. I'm not going to reduce your car lanes. Like none of that, but I'm just going to add more and more and more, right?
Very like sort of linear, not wholesome.
We are very shy about making a stand. This is where we want to be, right? So we can't, we are here, but don't worry about your cars. It's okay. You know, you can come to the city with a car. If you do that, my greatest fear is that you will have different strata of society that's just layered on top and they cannot interact, right? Because they live in different universe, basically. So certain income group is one universe, then the middle income is one universe, and then the top 5 is just in a bubble. So you have bubbles of bubbles of bubbles, and that would further erode trust, right? Because you're not building a platform for these different groups of people, including the youth, to even see other communities, right? So of youth of, I don't know, middle class is hanging out in the mall, like drinking bubble tea and watching a movie after taking a Grab there, right? And then the youth of, you know, lower income groups, they're going to school, or like they are the ones who's driving the Grab itself, or like the Food Panda, right? And their interaction becomes different. So if we decide to make this kind of non-integration infrastructure building, that's what the society will become.
Yeah. Talking about that, it reminded me of an interesting story. We know of this girl. She's a 14-year-old, high school. So right after school, she comes back home. She can't go anywhere else. There's no library in the area. The mall, Lalaport, was the closest one in Pudu area. But Lalaport, right? She said, I can go to the food court if I want to do homework. But yeah, what's that? And then your friends can't come over because the space is only 540 square feet. Her room is smaller than our couch here, actually.
I suspect that she has to risk her life every time she needs to cross the highway to Lalaport, right? So you take the different income groups and how they access this so-called public amenity, which is the mall, which is very ironic because it's private, right? But the accessibility is different now because now you've privatized it. You need to be a certain income group to even access it and not cross the road and die along the way. So those are the things that has become non-level playing field, right? Even though theoretically it is public space. But how public is a highway?
Exactly.
It's interesting to see the level of accessibility for different groups of people. I think, you know, if you just lay it down, you don't really see it as much. But when you talk about it like this and you see the different ways people interact with public amenities, it's very jarring for some people. So yeah, right. On that, I think I want to talk a bit more on prioritization, because obviously when it comes to making a whole plan on how KL will be livable, there's a lot of things you need to prioritize, right? So how do you prioritize these various aspects? Health, accessibility, safety, there's so many. So how do we go about, making sure that we hit all the right notes, basically? Maybe Afaf, you can start first.
So that's the thing, right? It's a complex problem. So there's no such thing as like we can prioritize, but the methodology of prioritization is the most important thing. So at Kita Untuk Kita, we actually put it back to the community. So in our grants program or our physical improvement projects, we actually ask the community, you have a selection of sites, for example, or a selection of things you want to create or improve, prioritize. And that's when it starts working. Because we have to give agency back to the community and let them decide what they want to prioritize, because it's their lived experience as well.
Yeah.
And we found that once they decide on it, they're much more engaged. They have a say in it, so they have agency as well. And the maintenance is really easy because they take pride into what they chose and what they created, and then they will maintain it. It's the methodology that we are trying to change, because currently it's more of a top-down approach. But I think we can, instead of a linear up and down or up, it can be at the same plane. So we have to work together with the community, because there's no one-stop solution, unfortunately.
Right. Cha-ly, talking about, you mentioned just now, highways. I feel that, when it comes to people outside looking in, KL as a global city for tourists, for foreign investment? You know, more highways, great, you know. But like, you know,
I'm not
talking
sure if
about
that's true, but anyway.
like, you know, this sort of development or economic standing and all that. So how do you prioritize, you know, the need for the government to address this making KL or Malaysia a high-income country and looking like it, as opposed to the nitty-gritty stuff that we see, you know, that we discuss here?
To be very honest, I don't know any high-income global city that has a lot of highways going.
Yeah,
I
probably.
I cannot even name one, actually.
Yeah.
If you think Singapore, Hong Kong, you don't see highways flying over the fifth story.
Yeah.
And you go to New York, you go to London,
It's all
this does not
subways,
happen.
yeah.
You know why? Because as high income, the public space becomes so expensive. Because the space that you're taking in the public, it becomes so expensive, they don't allow you to privatize it. If in London, they don't even have on-street parking because you cannot privatize that 100 square feet for your car. This is public space.
Right.
You cannot park your car there. That's how they think about it, because you're so high income that public space becomes so precious that I cannot just allow you to chop. Right? This is privatized area. So I think that mentality needs to change. Like, people have this assumption that a lot of cars, a lot of highways, a lot of convenience means
nice
modernization.
malls, nice infrastructure and all that.
I'm sorry, please travel.
Yeah.
This is not what happens. And so modernity has now changed. Modernity is when people walk out at night. You can see guys jogging at night. They feel safe. Women can jog. You know, kids can walk to the library without feeling like a car is going to hit them. You know, those are the things that it means maturity, it means modernity, it means advancement. That the community is so strong that they're looking out for each other. That is what development is.
That is what makes KL a livable city, hopefully one day. I mean, we're getting there, but it's a long road
continuous
ahead.
work in progress.
Right. Unfortunately, that's the only time we have. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, actually, the K2K program just launched a grant for open to everybody, especially youths around Malaysia, to apply for programs that improve the livable cities in Kuala Lumpur. So applications are open. Just reach out to thinkcity.com.my and we'll assist you throughout the way.
Right. Thank you so much, Afaf and Cha-ly, for being here on our show to talk about how to make KL a more livable city. I'm Fanashe. Thank you for watching.